Dr. Paul Hsieh, to my right, is a medical doctor down in South Metro area. I got his medical degree from University of Michigan and did some training in Washington State and in Los Angeles also. And he's been in practice here in Denver for 14 years. So that's about it. With no further ado, please help me in welcoming Paul Hsieh.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Brian, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. This will be very informal. I hope there will be lots of audience interaction and participation. I want this to be a lively discussion, not to the fist fight level, but lively. Okay? And so, as you know, the topic is, how do you know if your doctor is any good? This is something that I've wrestled with myself as a physician, because as a doctor, you sometimes have to either recommend someone good for a friend or get someone good for yourself. And so, let's start. There's an old joke that kind of goes, what do you call the guy who graduated at the bottom of his medical school class?
Doctor.
Right. So, doctors are not all equally good, and everyone kind of knows that. I mean, so here are three of my favorite TV doctors. Like, at least maybe some of the young people might not know who this guy is, Marcus Welby, MD, but he was like the quintessential Mr. Nice Guy, awesome doctor. Okay. And if you had to decide, would you want him to take care of you? Most people say, yeah, I would like Marcus Welby to take care of me. The second guy? Who's the second guy? You guys must know him, right? Right. Now, would you want him to take care of you?
Yes.
Yeah, you would probably be alive at the end of the hour, but you would have a very uncomfortable hour while his underlings did all sorts of stuff to you, you know? Like,
if I were sick enough to see him, I'd want to see him, but I wouldn't want to be sick enough to see him.
Right. And my other favorite TV doctor, who's the guy on the bottom right? You guys know?
Dr. Nick.
Dr. Nick, yeah, he's sort of the Simpsons sort of prototypical terrible quack doctor. Now, and of course, he's horrible, but the nice thing about Dr. Nick is he does stand by his work. So he says, if I kill you, you're okay. All right. Today we're going to talk about the following topics, which is basically how can you find a good doctor. I'm going to discuss first just some common strategies that people use. All the strategies have some strengths and some weaknesses, and it's good to know what strengths and weaknesses are so that you can employ them in the appropriate fashion. I'll take a little step back into this concept of value that is being a hot button topic in much discussion of public policy and healthcare nowadays. And then I'm going to kind of end with a few practical, like what can you do when you go home, tips that I hope will be useful to you. Okay. So let's suppose you just moved to Denver Boulder area and you're in pretty good health. You need to find the doctor. Like, what would you do if you just relocated and you had to find the doctor? What are some of the things that you've all done as you move from one city to another? Shout out. What? Google, okay. Phone a friend, okay. Read reviews, okay. All right.
Trial and error.
What?
Trial and error.
And those are all strategies that are pretty commonly used and for damn good reason. And so some of the typical ones that you'll hear, word of mouth, like you would find a friend, maybe your aunt knows someone who lives in the same city who can tell you something. There are more and more rating systems, both generated by patients and by other physicians, that are going to that are gaining traction, and they have strengths and weaknesses. Some people like to rely on various degrees of credentialing, licensure, vetting by third parties that are presumably trustworthy. But of course, then the question is, can you trust the supposed trustworthy party? And we're going to see the rise of various government quality metrics, and the word I put in quotes because I have some reservations about that. But that's going to become a bigger and bigger part of how healthcare is delivered in the United States, and there's going to be some important strengths and weaknesses you should know about various government quality rating measures and metrics. So, word of mouth is probably the most common method that regular people use. This is an article from one of my medical economics, journals. Word of mouth still tops ways people find physicians. And roughly 3/4 of young adults use personal recommendations to select a physician according to medical economics. And so, what's good about word of mouth? Like, what would be something you would like about the whole word of mouth methodology? Reliable source. Okay, good.
You know where they live.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if your sister went to somebody and they liked it, and they're still alive, it counts for something, doesn't it? Right? Okay. But what might be some of the downsides or the potential weaknesses of the word of mouth methodology?
Subjective.
Yeah.
Subjective, small sample size, right?
And
everyone's different.
Yes, so what one person likes, someone else might not like, right? For legitimate reasons, correct? Yes.
Yeah, there's that one.
People are idiots. I missed that. Okay, people are idiots. Yeah, and more seriously though, sometimes maybe your mother-in-law, she's really good at noticing if the office is clean, if the magazines are up to date, and if the receptionist has people moving in a speedy fashion. But that's not necessarily the same as, is the doctor going to actually take care of you with the right treatment, right? So you can get some helpful information, but that might not be the thing that you want to know. There's physician referrals and rating systems out there. If you lived in Denver for a while, you've probably seen every year 5280 magazine has this top doctors thing. And I actually like this a lot. These are doctors who are chosen by other doctors. Like I get this ballot. It's kind of like the all-star ballot for baseball or basketball. You kind of go through the list, and you don't know who the best one is in the field. You just leave it blank. But I definitely rate the ones I happen to know. And whenever I look at the yearly listings, and it's an area where I actually happen to have some familiarity with, I'm generally pretty positive on who they've chosen. Now, there's an interesting, they'll say, here's the top 5 orthopedic surgeons, and I'll say, well, I know 3 of them, and they're actually really good. But there's a couple weaknesses there. So what might some of those weaknesses be then, if you could kind of predict what they might be? Then? That might be. There might be a little bit of, who's the familiar name that might be known, even if they're not necessarily best. Okay?
You're in practice with them, so you have an incentive to vote for them.
Right. Although they don't know you voted for them, but you have there's some selection bias and familiarity bias that that you can have. It's also true that there could be, say, 30 really good neurosurgeons, and I'll know some of them, and 5 of them will make the list, but that doesn't mean that you didn't make the list, you're bad. There's going to be a lot of very good doctors that just for whatever reason didn't make the list. Maybe they aren't as busy on the hospital board of directors as someone, or they just don't have their name in as much circulation. But
they were just number 6 out of 5.
They could be 6, and you might never, the quality difference between number 5 and number 6 could be essentially nil, but they just didn't make the cut that year, But for what it's worth, I picked my primary care doctor because she was on the list when I first moved here, and she's awesome. So, there is some merit to something like this, even though this methodology has certain weaknesses as well. Rating systems, okay? That's something that has definitely come up. Patient rating systems, and you can look on Yelp and find, what people think of a doctor, and that can be very informative at times. But in Forbes a couple of years ago, there's a pretty decent article on why rating your doctor is bad for your health. And I just wanted to quote a little bit from that. This is from the opening. Suffering from a toothache, a South Carolina woman headed to her local ER a few months ago. The doctor there responded by administering Dilaudid, a powerful intramuscular narcotic typically reserved for cancer-related pain. Why, his nurse queried, was he killing a flea with a sledgehammer? Was he afraid of malpractice? No, the doc replied. Press Ganey, which you guys have never heard of, but we've all. My scores last month were low. And if you don't know, Press Ganey is like this big elephant. They basically own the market in doctor ratings by patients. And people are basically, they're very sensitive to the Press Ganey score that comes out. And one of my favorite Onion articles, this is from the Onion, okay? Physician shoots off a few Adderall prescriptions to improve his Yelp rating. Now it sounds funny, right? But, so here from the Onion article, I keep a pretty close eye on my reviews, and whenever I see my number fall below 4 stars, I just write out a few extra Adderall or Dexedrine scripts, and it's backed up to no time. And the same article said, and I made the mistake once of prescribing exercise and healthy diet, and I got the 1-star review, and I'm never making that mistake again. So you have to be, because the patient rating does not necessarily reflect how good the advice is, and this is funny because it seems like it's over the top humor, but actually there's a doctor who's written extensively about the problem of patient ratings. This is Dr. William Sonnenberg. He mentioned how the real life can meet the onion at times. In one of his articles, he wrote, one emergency room with poor survey scores started offering hydrocodone goodie bags to their discharged patients to improve their ratings. This is Vicodin. This is the good stuff, So this is not, what was once a humorous Onion piece can sometimes leak into the real world in ways you're not necessarily wanting to see take effect. Okay, so that's one of the potential problems with the ratings, even though they can often be informative as well. It's kind of like, does your mother-in-law know how good a doctor is?
So where was that doctor?
Okay. Now, some people will put some stock in government licensure, right? This is a little screenshot for my Colorado medical license. I admitted that I blacked out some of the sensitive, but that's my Colorado medical license, right? So Does this mean I'm a good doctor?
No.
Correct answer is no. I mean, I think I am, but not because of this, right? And the way I like to explain this to patients will often think, well, the government signed off on you. You've got to be okay at least. Maybe you're not not everyone's going to be like the best, but you've got to be okay. And what I like to tell people is, well, ask yourself this. Does this mean you're a good driver? Okay. All right. And people, okay, I get it. All right. There's other forms of credentialing which have different strengths and weaknesses. Some people will rely or put some stock in, like, which medical school did they go to? You know, and I think most medical schools that are U.S.-based schools are pretty good. So if someone's a graduate of a credible University of Michigan, CU, Harvard, I mean, they're all pretty good. If they went to, like, Podunk University in, like, Bahamas, maybe you want to wonder, Ohio State is a good school. I don't like the football team, but they're a good school. Okay, all right. I actually think board certification can be very helpful, because if you specialize in something, like I specialize in radiology, and I had to pass a whole set of written and oral exams to become what they call board certified. And a surgeon has to do that, a pediatrician. And so if they're board certified in something, that often means they've spent the time and effort to get proficient. Like, anyone can be an MD and they can call themselves anything. Like, you can have a medical license and say, well, I do pediatrics. But if you haven't been certified, maybe you're getting you're kind of rolling the dice if they're not certified. So that can be helpful. It's not 100%, but it can be useful. So this is like, the little screenshot from the American Board of Radiology showing hardworking radiologist. Look at all the pictures he looks at to do his job. There's credentialing by a reputable hospital, and that's sort of the key, because a good hospital has a certain natural vested interest in making sure that the doctors that work there are not screw-ups. Anyone with a medical license can open a little clinic that's their own office that's in a strip mall and say, I do plastic surgery, and nobody can stop them. But if you say, I do surgery and I practice, I'll pick one of the hospitals, Swedish Hospital in Englewood, which is one of the level 1 trauma centers, a very good hospital down there. And I have friends, some of my practice partners have worked on the credentialing board at Swedish for every year. And so they work pretty hard to try to weed out the yahoos, because they don't want Swedish's reputation to take a hit by having people say, yeah, every time I had a baby delivered there, it was horrible, and Swedish is a lousy place. So you don't want that kind of rep. So there's a sort of indirect effect in which a credentialing board for a good hospital will have a natural interest in making sure that the doctors that are affiliated with them are good. But what's the key? It's got to be a good hospital, right? And this doesn't always work. And so one of the stories that I followed for a little while last year was this really interesting case of a hospital that seemed to maybe have a conflict of interest. So this was hospital. This is from Syracuse, New York. So Monica Hughes is not here. Would have a great laugh with it. Hospital restores butt-slapping surgeon's privileges. This is from last year, October 2014. So this is Dr. Clark was suspended in February after staff members accused him of calling anesthetized patients derogatory names and slapping them so hard that he left red marks and handprints on their buttocks. The hospital, according to federal investigators, had ignored staff complaints for more than a year before finally taking action. Dr. Clark was also accused of directing sexually explicit language at staff members during procedures. When the accusations came to light, Dr. Clark claimed that the slapping of patients was his way of testing the adequacy of their spinal anesthetic. Okay? Now, I don't know where he went. They didn't teach us that at University of Michigan. That was not how we learned how to check some anesthetic level. Okay? Clearly, this is like a bad apple, but the hospital kept them on. And you go, well, why did the hospital keep them on? And the local newspapers actually did a pretty good job of digging into it, and they got some interesting data. At the hospital in question, 2013, the profit that hospital made was $2.1 million. That's total profit. When they kicked him out in 2014, they had a $4.1 million loss, which according to the Syracuse, whatever, most of that was due to the doctor's departure. It's not that the doctor charges that much, but every time he does some kind of hip replacement, there's all these hospital fees. The doctor might charge, say, $5,000 to replace your hip, but the hospital bills for the time and the drugs and the OR time and the beds, it racks up. And so a big, busy surgeon can have an enormous influence on a hospital's bottom line, and it may potentially pervert their willingness to do what's right.
Well, and it's also interesting, though, because that may be an indication that he's a good doc who just saw too many MASH episodes, and perhaps it's perhaps the doctoring is more important than the butt slapping.
Perhaps, and they didn't go too much into was he actually a surgeon, but I'm not sure I would want him as my surgeon. And of course, later in 2014, the hospital did reinstate the doctor. They posted this long statement. He's going to be a good boy now, and these actions were taken with the strong consideration of St. Joseph's mission, vision, and values. So that was their official statement. And the newspapers that report on this kind of portrayed it like St. Joseph's mission, vision, values. Okay, I think they raised a good question, and I think people now there are on a little bit of alert. Okay, so all right. Now another method that's being used for a while, and this is actually still ongoing. Various state governments would issue report cards on doctors. They would pick a couple of critically important specialties. In this case, both New York State in the 1990s and Massachusetts in the 2000s started issuing report cards for the heart surgeons, listing the success rates and their death rates for their patients. Okay, and you think, well, that would be good to know, just like an Amazon review. I'd like to know, does my doctor, do the patients pull through, or do they do badly? Okay, so let's just kind of take a little hypothetical. Let's do an exercise. Suppose you need heart surgery, but it's not an emergency. You have a little time to do some consumer comparison shopping. And you look on the website for the doctor that does the thing you need, and there's Dr. A, there's Dr. B, and there's Dr. C. And Dr. A's survival rate is 100%. Dr. B's is 95%, and Dr. C's is 90%. And let's say this is like their last year 12-month total. Okay, so it's pretty recent. So question would be, who would you pick, or would you say, I don't yet know enough to know who I would pick? Okay, okay, clear. Okay, like what other variables might you want to know then?
Really risky procedure.
Okay.
Dr. C could be a level 1 trauma center surgeon, and he does all the toughest cases, whereas Dr. A could be doing freaking angioplasty.
There's all the easy ones, like the low-hanging fruit, right? Is that what you're thinking? Okay, all right. Any other sort of thoughts?
How many did they do?
Huh? How many did they do? Okay, very good question. Right. Yep. All right. So now you dig in a little deeper, and you go, okay, Dr. A did 2 of these procedures last year. They both survived. Dr. B did 19 of them, 20 of them, and 19 of them survived. Dr. C did 100 of them, and 90% survived. Still more informative, right? But you don't, some of them, like what Wendy asked, you don't necessarily know. Are you comparing apples to apples? So these are actually the questions that the state governments of New York and Massachusetts had to grapple with. Like, how do you know, is the doctor any good or not? Like, does that number tell you what you would like to know from it? And one of the nice expose articles kind of analyzing the experience in New York State, Heartless, I just put a couple snippets. 75% of this is how they surveyed the heart surgeons themselves, anonymous. They said, so what do you actually do when you have a patient? 79% of the responders agreed that the public mortality statistics have discouraged them from taking on a risky patient. If you're a hard case, in other words, 4 out of 5 doctors would think twice before operating on you. And one of the cases they discussed, there's a certain kind of heart attack that it damages the heart muscle in a particularly bad way. So if you have that kind of attack, if you get no surgery, it's like a 90% chance you're going to die. If you get surgery, there's a 50% chance you'll die and 50% chance you'll live. So most people say, sign me up. I want to have at least the 50% shot, right? Now, would the surgeon want to touch you, though, if you have a 50-50 chance of dying in his operating room? Not if it's going to screw up his numbers, right? So there's a weird, perverse incentive you've got to be careful of when you report numbers in a way that that might affect how the doctors will choose to treat you or not treat you. From the article, in the first few years after the report card program began, the Cleveland Clinic received 31% more referrals from New York hospitals than they had previously received, and the study verified that the New York patients were sicker than those who had been referred from other states, right? So you can see the doctor's like, get this guy out of my clinic. I'm not touching this dude, right? Some surgeons, now sometimes they try to find ways, well, let's adjust it for like how hard the case is. Like maybe he's like an A-level case or a B and a C, and we can maybe tweak the numbers and report them in a way that you get credit for taking on the tougher cases. That makes sense. Some surgeons look for ways to make their easy cases seem harder. Others make their hard cases appear so difficult that they place out of the reporting system altogether. When it comes to the sickest patients, some surgeons just turn them away and say, can't do anything, go to the ICU and just hope he pulls through because they don't want to touch him. And one of the examples that they cited was, for instance, they had this system where if a patient was a heart attack patient and they were on nitroglycerin drip to help them survive, that was like a harder case, and you weren't expected to save as many of them versus people that didn't eat nitro. It was kind of interesting that the number of people who were on nitro just before surgery went up because they're, I think he needs nitro now, And so maybe people were getting a little unnecessary medication just so that they could be bumped into the category that you got more credit for, right? So you have to be careful about these little unintended consequences of well-intentioned systems.
Although if they're on nitro, you might not want to bump them at all.
Of course, any one case, you could say the surgeon would say, well, yeah, I think you need it. And that's such kind of a judgment call. And it's kind of hard to gainsay one. But if you look at the statistics, you go, that's an interesting pattern that these people would not have been put on nitro the year before the reporting system started. So it just makes you go, A final thing, those are state-level metrics. We're going to start seeing much more federal government involvement in attempting to rate the quality of doctors through various metrics to help you decide, is your doctor any good? We're here for the government, we're from the government, and we're going to help you figure out if your doctor is any good. And so some of the phrases you'll see, these phrases have been in the medical literature for a few years now, and they're starting to filter into like the popular press, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. So you'll see phrases like quality metrics, pay for performance with the acronym P4P, value, not volume, alternative payment methods, accountable care. There are all these little phrases that are floating around that you will, if you start looking for them, you'll see them being cited by some guy that gets interviewed in the New York Times and whatnot. And these are all basically variations of some way the government is going to try to determine if your doctor is good. This was a landmark article in the New England Journal of Medicine just a couple of months ago, March 2015, by Sylvia Burwell. So she's the head of Department of Health and Human Services. The article was Setting Value-Based Payment Goals, HHS Efforts to Improve U.S. Healthcare. So they're laying out very explicitly for physicians, this is the plan, this is the agenda, this is how we want to move forward to make payments to doctors under the new system, which Obamacare is part of that system. This has been going on for a while, and Obamacare is merely a part of a longer-running trend. And if you kind of go through the details and kind of just cut to the chase, what it boils down to is essentially the doctors will get paid, or they get paid more to the extent they adhere to the government practice and treatment guidelines, and you get dinged in some capacity, penalized or whatever, to the extent that you don't. And so there's essentially a combination of ratcheting up of carrots and sticks. And most of this will happen through the Medicare program, because Medicare is what the federal government has direct control over the dollars spent. But many private insurers essentially follow Medicare. They take their lead from Medicare as far as what they pay for or don't pay for. What if they penalize a doctor? So because the federal government controls in the 30 to 40% of the dollars spent, private insurers tend to follow suit over time. So whatever the Health and Human Services Department does will eventually filter into the rest of the nominally private insurance sector as well. So it's important to know what the feds are doing, because that's what will happen around the country. And just from this is from the Medicare official website. I'm not expecting to actually look at these. These are some of the different quality metrics that a primary care doctor will be judged on. I'm going to zoom in on just there's a bunch of these. Zoom in on just one small subsection. So they'll be ranked like flu shots, influenza immunization. Did a certain number of your patients get flu shots? Did they hit their target? Pneumococcal vaccination, adult weight screening, tobacco use, depression, colon cancer, mammography, a whole bunch of things. If you're diabetic, a bunch of things. Hemoglobin A1C, and you don't have to know the details, but there's a whole set of little checklists and hoops that the doctor will be rewarded or punished for based on whether they do or don't have enough patients who go through all of this stuff. Now, bear in mind, most primary care doctors work on very tight schedules to kind of make their overhead. They have to kind of see a patient pretty much every 15 minutes. If they spend half hour with you, they're starting to lose money because they just can't see enough patients at their pay scale to meet their overhead. So you think of that precious 15 minutes you have with your doc, and if they're stuck doing 7 or 8 of these, how's your smoking? How's your weight control? And if they have to be able to check that off, and if you've just burned through half of your good time with them, if you're doing all of this stuff, which might be good or might not be good, And of course, if you say, I don't like this stuff, it's like, what's the matter? You want people to die of colon cancer? So it's framed in a funny way that it's hard to challenge some of these things because, like, if you oppose this, well, you must be in the pockets of big tobacco, or you must want people to die of breast cancer. And obviously, that's not necessarily the case. And when some of this stuff came out, there was actually a really nice online commentary made by a primary care doctor in the trenches who said, this is crap. And what she wrote, essentially, this is Lynn Benson. This is a great thing in the New England Journal of Medicine website. I've been dinged for no mammogram on a woman with no breasts, no A1C on a long dead patient, no stop smoking advice on a lifelong non-smoker, no flu vaccine on a Christian scientist. It's like, this is crazy. Like, I get. And she says, I used to correct all of this one patient at a time, submitting the office notes, the death certificates, etc. But I can't do that anymore because one of the new core measures is completing and signing my charts within 24 hours. It's 11 p.m. I need to get back to work because all these charts have to have today's date on them for Medicare. So she's kind of stuck. It's BS that she knows it, but that's what's called quality. So this is one of the real unintended consequences of all these piling on of various quality measures. Again, it's not that any specific issue, like colon cancer is a bad thing. You don't want to have colon cancer, but the way it's implemented has potentially very perverse incentives for doctors. Basically, the bottom line is these government metrics can have the effect of making doctors jump through the hoops, and it creates a mindset of this one-size-all-fits-all cookbook approach to medicine, and it takes away from the ability of the doctor to spend time and actually dig into what your issue is and help you out with your actual problem. So that's my little rant on the government metrics. I want to take a little philosophical step back. As many of you know, I'm a fan of Ayn Rand's works. And one of the things she wrote in one of her essays was a little essay on just value. And what she said was sort of fundamental to an objective theory of values is the question of value to whom and for what. And this is actually a critical question to ask when you talk about any kind of attempted assessment of value of doctors or their patients, because to whom and for what? And one way I like to explain this to people is, let's say you're trying to argue, well, who's the best doctor, Dr. A or Dr. B? It's kind of hard to know how to answer the question unless you're kind of saying, well, for whom? It's kind of like if let's say your 7-year-old kid says, well, which is the best car? Like this BMW, sedan or this Toyota truck? But it sort of depends on who's going to be driving it and for what, right? Like, if you're going to be hauling hay around, you don't want to be done. If you want to get to, if you want to zip around and enjoy the motorcycle, basically it depends on what the purpose of the car is for you, the driver, right? There's not a single answer that is appropriate for everyone. There's an important element of who is the recipient of the value. That's actually a critical part of knowing what the value is, right? You cannot just divorce value from the valuer, right? And unfortunately, a couple things with respect to these government value metrics, actual value can be extremely difficult to measure. What's easy to measure does not necessarily correspond to what is of value to the patient, and what's of value to the patient can be extraordinarily difficult to measure. But of course, what governments need is something easy they can codify, run the stats through, and say, okay, you get your money, you get a 5% penalty, you get no money, So this is the fundamental problem with some of these government attempted value metrics is that they're trying to solve an inherently very difficult problem with a tool that doesn't work. And the net effect is what happens is the bureaucrat's judgment for what is good or not good gets substituted for your doctor. Like the doctor will say, I'd actually like to spend more time talking with Wendy about the issue that she has with like her injured foot. But I have to go through these checklists first, otherwise I don't get paid. So it puts the doctor in an uncomfortable position of having, do I want to do what I can do to keep the office open, or do I do what I need to do for the patient, right? And it sets up a bad conflict of interest. And, what you end up with is sort of, Uncle Sam knows what's right for you, right? We're here to help you. There are ways to avoid this problem. I have a whole separate talk on the idea of direct pay doctors. Some people call them concierge doctors, but basically they're medical doctors who can take a lot longer with you because they essentially have you on a subscription model. Like, pay maybe $50 a month. You're a member of them. That fee buys you a whole bunch of unlimited access. You get their email. Those fees, they have a smaller panel of patients they take care of instead of 3,000 patients per doctor. Maybe it's like 500 patients, and they're much more available. The appointments, when you see them, you get to talk to them for like 45 minutes or an hour. they're not accountable to anyone else except you because you're paying their salary, and they have a powerful incentive to deliver service that you are happy with. And again, I have a talk that goes into the details of how this works, but it can be a very, very good win-win, both for the doctor and the patient. The doctor says, I finally get to practice medicine in a way that makes me, that's why I went to medical school. I get to talk to the patients, find out what the problem is, figure it out, kind of talk about their life, what's going on at home, are the kids bugging them, etc. And then they can really get at the root of many of their patients' problems. And the patients feel like, finally, someone's listening to me. I can tell them what I need to say. I don't feel like I'm being rushed. And there's several of these doctors in the Denver area. There's one, I just picked this one, Insight Primary Care. Ari Armstrong, one of our friends, actually goes see this with Lisa Davis. This is like from their website. She's been written up like in 5280 magazine, and she's been interviewed like by Reason magazine. She has a somewhat high public profile as an advocate for this kind of work. And I don't know her personally, but I've known of her, and she has a very good reputation amongst people as being like a damn fine primary care doctor. I don't know if she's full or not, but that's one option. I know there's people in Boulder that offer this. There's people in the Colorado Springs area that offer this. People in Denver for sure. So you'd have to basically just hunt around and find someone who can do this kind of direct pay or primary care. And there's definitely friends of mine that live in New York or San Francisco that love theirs, and they're not that expensive either. They can be like $50 a month. It's not like thousands and thousands of dollars a year. So you have to, there's different tiers of service, but you can find one that's generally pretty affordable for most people. As they say, it's like getting a Starbucks every day. If you're willing to spend $4 to get a latte, would you be willing to spend that amount of money for the monthly fee for these direct? So let's go to what can you do, some actual practical steps. And I'm going to preface this by saying, unfortunately, there's not like a single easy magic bullet. Like you do this and you're guaranteed to get a good doctor, because it doesn't work that way. But I do think it's important to get recommendations from as many credible sources as possible. You can do online background checks. Like I pulled this from the state of California regulatory website, and I know there's issues about. And Colorado has a similar thing. You can look up a doctor. This is meant for the public. You could look up a doctor on the state website. You type in their name, and you can see how many patients have filed complaints against him. Yeah, it doesn't weed out everyone, but if you got to go, wow, this guy has like 8 complaints against him in the last year for like slapping butts. You kind of go, okay, maybe I don't want him to be like my doctor. And if they have 0 hits, that doesn't necessarily mean they're good, but it can at least be a bit of data you can work with. Okay? I do think ultimately you have to do your own research, both into the doctor, if you can, and also into your own medical problem. Like you can't just say, I'll trust what the doctor says. You may have to do some legwork. Like you can say, I have horrible diabetes and I'm having trouble with like my eyesight going bad. You may have to actually do some of your own work on what are some of the issues, and what are some of the possible treatments, and what are some of the complications and the pros and cons. You have to basically take ownership of your own body, which is your body. So I don't think there's any way around that, but I think it's actually good for people to adopt that attitude. You need to ask questions of different doctors when you meet them. And there's basically those are sort of the core things you can do. And I'll confess, I use Dr. Google a lot. Like I'm often when the patient's like not in the next room, I'll like quickly Google this thing so that they don't know. And I kind of, I think you need to have this, right? And I sound really good because I just looked up on Google like 5 minutes ago. And of course, a lot of patients use Google too to find out all sorts of health information. Like, okay, this is the autocomplete part. Why does it hurt? And the first 4 things. Why does it hurt when I pee? Why does it hurt to swallow? Why does it hurt when I poop? Why does it hurt after I have sex? Okay. And those must be the 4 most common queries of people that want to know why does something hurt. Okay? And I'm just going to hope you're not doing all 4 of these at the same time. Okay? All right? Not that there's anything wrong with it. This is Colorado. We're like pretty open-minded here. So if that's your cup of tea, I'm not going to argue with you. I may see you in the emergency room, but I'm not going to argue with you. Okay. All right.
I'll roll that in the Q&A.
Yes. All right. So, but other things you can do that may help you find a good doctor. Things that you can actually judge them by in part. Will they actually listen to you? In other words, you talk to them, do they actually process what you're saying, respond in a way that indicates they've understood your concern and are addressing what or are they just kind of blowing through a spiel? Maybe they're too fast, maybe they're too rushed, but are they taking the time to actually absorb and integrate the things you're telling them and factoring that into what they tell you next? Are they considering your individual circumstances and advising you? Or are they saying, everyone needs one of these surgeries, It's kind of like the shady car mechanic. It's funny how you go to Mufflers R Us and, wow, it looks like you really need a muffler now, And you just kind of wonder, okay, that's a little fishy there. Okay, I mean, does their advice make sense? I mean, you just basically this is the part you have to do. You have to just think, does this fit in with everything else I know about my own health and what I kind of know about medicine and just the world in general? Or are they selling me something that just doesn't sound right? And it's definitely okay to seek a second opinion. And actually, one of the metrics I use is if a doctor is saying, yep, you should go get a second opinion, that's actually a good sign. Whereas if a doctor says, you don't need a second opinion, just stick with me, that's a little shady. It's kind of like, the people that say, you don't know, you don't need to go to any other car shops because we've got you covered. Don't even bother checking out somebody else. I'm also careful to not trust people that don't want me to use my own mind. What was I going to say? Yeah, so this is like my shameless plug for one of my partners, Dr. Charlie Nutting. He's one of the radiologists in my own practice. He does this super duper hardcore, what's called interventional oncology radiology. So if you have certain kinds of tumors, he's the guy. This is like a picture of him at work. He would pass like one of those special sterile catheters into like the major blood vessel in your leg. Let's say you've got liver tumors. He could manipulate it to the spot in your liver where the cancer is, inject the appropriate chemotherapy agent or whatever, deliver like the cancer killing dose to where the bad stuff is while sparing or protecting as much of like the healthy liver as possible. He's awesome. He's actually very well known nationally, and he does very high-end stuff. So if you have certain types of serious cancers, Charlie is the guy I would go to. I wouldn't want to have the cancer, but if I had, he would be the guy I would want to go to help take care of me if I had the problem that he's good at. Other questions you can ask. How many of these have you done? And the right answer is like, I do them all the time, right? The wrong answer is like, I've also wanted to do one of these. If you die, you'll pay, right? Dr. Nick. Okay. Another question. If you weren't going to be the one operating on me, who would you send me to? Who would you send your mom to? Great questions to ask. And you often get pretty straight answers. And that's actually very helpful. This is Dr. Brooke Spencer. She's one of my other radiology partners. She does a lot of similar stuff. One of her areas is she does these things called uterus fibroid embolization. So if you have a woman has fibroids, it's just a problem. It's a benign kind of growth in the uterus that can make it harder for them to get pregnant. They can have bleeding. It can be very painful. And so this is actually Jennifer Armstrong. Many of you know Ari and Jen. So this is all taken from Ari's blog. This is all public information. So I'm not revealing anything that he doesn't want you to know. But basically, she had these problems, and they went from doctor to doctor. Doctor said, "What do you need?" And it turned out like the doctor that does a certain kind of surgery goes, "Oh, you need exactly the kind of surgery. I just happen to offer exactly the thing that you need." And he was like, "That doesn't sound right." And they did a lot of very careful comparison shopping. I referred them to Brooke and said, well, you can go talk to her and see if she makes sense to you. And she made a lot of sense to them. And so she does that thing, and you pass this little plastic catheter through the artery in the leg. You find the fibroid that's caused by them. You inject a certain kind of material that will shrink and reduce the fibroids. This is the picture that Ari took of the two of them. There's Brooke smiling, and there's Jenna in bed. And she was actually doing really well afterwards. And they were going to come tonight, but the reason they couldn't is because Jen is pregnant, which she is now pregnant because she got this procedure. And they're at pregnancy class tonight. So that's why they said they couldn't come. So Brooke did great by them. She does great by a lot of people. I'm very happy. I'm proud that she's one of my partners. And she's a good doctor. She's very nice, and she knows her stuff as well. So these are some questions you can ask that might be very helpful to you. So bottom line, you really have to know about your own health condition. You have to do your homework. The good news is in the era of the internet, it is much easier than ever to do the research. 20 years ago, it was harder. Now it's much easier. And I like to tell people, the internet is awesome. There's so much information out there, and some of it is even true. So, more seriously, you do have to think of your doctor as an advisor, not the guru or the authority that you just have to listen to. Don't take him on faith. I mean, just like any other advisor, whether it's your financial advisor or someone who's advising you about like a home repair, you think about it, and he has some standing, but he's not an automatic, whatever he says, I do. And there's kind of an older generation, like people that might be like my grandparents' generation. They're like, well, the doctor said this, and I'm just doing that. And they don't even question. And I like the modern approach of people are actually willing to question their doctors. I mean, I know some doctors cringe at the patient that comes in with like, I've got 400 pages of internet research on Google. I did my problem. Let's go over them one by one. And we're like, oh, geez. But I do think that's actually healthier than the old days of, I just listen to them without question. So finally, take home. There are good doctors out there. There are ways to find them. You have to work for them. And I hope that what I talked about today will help you find one of the good ones and will help you avoid the doctor news. We can do Q&A if you want to.